Okay, so it is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker. Bill is recently senior legal officer, William Brydie Watson, who is the person who has been basically single-handedly managing the MAC protocol all the way to the state in which it finds itself now, which is almost close to ratification. So he is the person who knows most about this protocol and most suited person to inform you of how things are and give you the basics of it, and then perhaps we can have a debate. En español, este punto es de todo lo que vamos a escuchar hoy, los más importantes para nosotros, claro, son el de ahora y el de luego, porque son los que, el de ahora es un tratado in the making, se está haciendo todavía, estamos en fieri, y por lo tanto es muy importante la contribución española, y el de después porque España aún no ha ratificado, y por lo tanto todo lo que podamos hacer para conseguir que lo haga por el beneficio de España, porque ya veréis luego los datos que nos da Teresa son muy importantes. España es un país exportador muy importante, pues será un servicio que prestemos a nuestro país, creo, y de paso a Unidroit también. So, floor is yours.
Thank you, Ignacio, and good afternoon to everyone. It's my pleasure to be here this afternoon to speak to you all about the MAC protocol. Firstly, I'm very sorry I don't speak Spanish. If I tried, I might offend the entire country, so I will just stick to English, and I'll try to speak slowly because I know the Australian accent can sometimes be challenging. So I'm particularly excited to be here because this is the second opportunity I've had in the last year to speak about the MAC protocol in Spain, because Spain is a particularly important country in relation to the negotiation of the MAC protocol, and have been involved, Spanish delegates have been involved for the last 5 years. And we believe, as I will note in this presentation, that the MAC protocol should have particularly significant economic benefits for Spain if Spain chose to ratify the protocol once it's concluded. So today I do not intend to speak for 45 minutes. I will try to keep myself relatively brief. I will speak about the development of the MAC protocol because it's the first new protocol to the Cape Town Convention. I'll speak a little about the work the Secretariat has done to hopefully deliver a successful protocol in November. And of course, I will speak a little about the diplomatic conference to adopt the MAC protocol, which will be held in November. So I don't want to spend too long on the legislative history of the MAC protocol. As you see on this slide, it has been on the program of Unidroit for 14 years. And during that time, there has been a huge amount of consultations with both the public and private sectors. The project substantively started to move forward quickly in 2014 with the creation of a small group of international experts in secured transactions law who were responsible for preparing the first draft of the instrument. We were very lucky that one of those 5 experts happened to be a Spanish professor in Teresa here. She was one of the 5 very limited experts involved in that process. And as a result, is in a good position to advise about the legal operation of the 34 articles in the draft instrument. As noted, it moved on to, once the draft protocol was ready, it moved on to intergovernmental negotiations with over 50 states in 2017, and we are looking towards adoption this year. Now, the way Unidroit goes about trying to create additional protocols to the Cape Town Convention is to satisfy 4 aspects that should contribute to the creation of a successful instrument. And they are, as per this slide, acceptable legal rules, beneficial economic impact, support from private industry, and support from states. So I will explore those issues a little bit now. in relation to acceptable legal rules, as set out by the Deputy Secretary General Anna Veneziano in her previous presentation, the MAC protocol is an extension of an already existing successful treaty. So there was no need to create a new instrument from scratch. It was the negotiation of the MAC protocol adopted an approach of only changing those rules that were necessary, but otherwise to stick with the formula of the Cape Town Convention because it has been outstandingly successful in relation to the aircraft protocol. It has financed billions of dollars of new transactions, and therefore there was an intention to try to stick with what Unidroit conceived as a winning formula. And on that basis, both the study group of experts and the Intergovernmental Committee both approved a protocol that was overall extremely consistent with the existing architecture for the Cape Town Convention. And I note in this slide those areas which are consistent and haven't changed. So the MAC protocol, the draft MAC protocol, provides for the creation of autonomous international interests in mining, agriculture and construction equipment. It will create an international registry for the registration of those interests. The registration of an international interest gives priority over non-registered interests and later registered interests. And the protocol itself provides clear enforcement remedies, both in the case of the default of the debtor and insolvency remedies. 75% of the 34 articles are identical or substantively consistent. So many experts in Cape Town and the aircraft protocol would understand vast majority of how the MAC protocol operates. But of course, the financing of mining, agriculture and construction equipment is in practice very different to the financing of aircraft, which means there were some rules that the MAC protocol had to change radically to make sure the protocol was fit for purpose. And I'll spend a little bit of time now speaking about some of those areas where the MAC protocol is quite different from the previous protocols. So in particular, there are 4 issues that the experts negotiating the MAC protocol had to deal with in some detail. Application of the convention, the relationship A, B, the association with immovable property, C, provisions relating to inventory, and D, how to amend the protocol. Now, the first issue is quite easy to understand. The Cape Town Convention, as explained by the Deputy Secretary General, is designed to regulate interests in high-value, mobile, uniquely identifiable equipment. That's the entire purpose of the treaty. Now, of course, there are many examples of high-value mobile MAC equipment. We can talk about $10 million cranes used to build stadiums, or drills used deep underground, used in different mines, or harvesters that move across borders during seasons. However, there are other types of MAC equipment, as I note on this slide, that are not high value. A lawnmower or a shovel is technically mining or agricultural equipment, but is clearly not used commercially and is clearly inappropriate to fall within the scope of the MAC protocol. The existing protocols to the Cape Town Convention use a descriptive approach to determine what they apply to. So the aircraft protocol sets out a description of aircraft equipment. The rail protocol sets out a description of railway rolling stock. And the space protocol sets out a description of space assets. Now, this was not possible for the MAC protocol, because if you said the MAC protocol applies to mining, agricultural and construction equipment, then it would apply to these things. If you said it applies to high value MAC equipment, that is an incredibly vague term that has no meaning. You can't describe only high value equipment, nor could you say something like the MAC protocol only applies to equipment worth 100,000 US dollars, because A, that would be very arbitrary, and B, it would be impossible to apply because of fluctuations in currency, sales on the secondary market, etc. So it was impossible for us to use the approach in the previous protocols in determining the scope of the MAC protocol. So what was suggested during one of the consultations in Washington in 2012 and 2013, or two consultations, was that the draft MAC protocol could use something called the Harmonized System to determine its scope. Now, the Harmonized System is an internationally accepted nomenclature for the regulation of world trade. And what it does is it divides all commodities traded across borders in the world into 5,000 individual 6-digit codes. So there is a code for bricks, there is a code for sand, there is a code for certain types of MAC equipment. So it was decided that this system, which is already accepted uniformly around the world, could provide a mechanism to identify the types of high-value mobile equipment the MAC protocol should apply to. So as I noted, that it divides all trade up into 5,000 codes, and what the draft MAC protocol does is it identifies a certain number of codes which fall within its scope because they apply to high-value mobile equipment. I have an example in this slide of the kind of code that has been included in the MAC protocol annexes. So 842959, which is confined to self-propelled bulldozers, angle dozers, graders, levelers, scrapers, mechanical shovels, excavators, shovel loaders, tamping machines, and road rollers. As you can see from this list, it is very specific. It covers a very, very specific type of equipment, and that type of equipment is predominantly high value. Most types of equipment under that code would be worth at least €100,000 per piece of equipment. And through consultations with the private sector and with the World Customs Organization, we were able to identify 42 codes that cover predominantly high-value mobile equipment. And this is how we got past the big problem of scope. Now, 42 codes out of 5,000 codes sounds like a small amount, but in reality, these 42 codes cover over $100 billion annually of international trade. So this is still, even though it seems small, it's still a very, very significant universe of equipment that the treaty will apply to. I'll skip that one. The second issue that is unique to the MAC protocol is how the draft text determines the relationship between interests in immovable property and interests in equipment under the MAC protocol. So obviously under the previous protocols, once again, this wasn't a problem because aircraft don't become attached or associated with land, with immovable property, neither do trains, neither do satellites. But of course, for example, a crane that is connected to land through concrete or through other mechanisms may be affected by interests in the immovable property, by the mortgage over the immovable property, and the exact rules regulating this arrangement is different in every country. There is no uniform standard for what we would call fixtures or in international law. Now, this is a very contentious issue because most states regard treatment of immovable property as a sovereign issue, and they don't want to be told how to regulate their immovable property. At the same time, we had to have some sort of mechanism because if you had an international interest that was simply extinguished as soon as a crane was attached to land, that would significantly damage the value of having an international interest in the equipment and therefore damage the entire treaty system. So given the sensitivity of this issue, it was decided to include a declaration, a mandatory declaration in the draft MAC protocol. As explained by the Deputy Secretary General, this ability to make declarations is a very innovative, valuable part of the Cape Town Convention world. And essentially, Article 7 says that for contracting states who implement the MAC protocol, they must make a choice about the relationship between immovable property and international interest in MAC equipment. They can choose alternative A, which prioritizes the interest in the MAC equipment as long as it's economic to remove it. Alternative B, it defers it defers to the local law in determining whether the international interest retains its own legal status as equipment, and if it does, then in most circumstances the international interest will retain priority over the immovable property interest, or alternative C simply defers to domestic law. And states must make a declaration of one of these three in determining how the MAC protocol will function in their jurisdiction. The third legal issue I wanted to touch on is that, unlike in the previous protocols, the MAC protocol has special rules regulating the financing of inventory, because it's quite common in the mining, agriculture and construction sectors for debtors to acquire their equipment from a dealer. They go to a local dealer and they will lease a crane, or they will purchase a tractor or a harvester on credit. Now, once again, this is not the practice in the aviation industry. You don't go down to the local Boeing factory and lease an aircraft from a dealer. So to accommodate the fact that inventory financing is an important part of the MAC industries, the MAC protocol has inserted a new article, Article 12, to allow states to opt out of the MAC protocol's application to inventory financing. And the idea of this is that it would allow states that had very well developed and very well functioning inventory financing laws to retain those laws while still implementing the MAC protocol for other types of secured financing deals. This was inserted at quite a late stage at the negotiations in 2017. And while there is policy clarity on the rationale behind the rule, because the rule was drafted over a short period, there are some defects in the current wording of the article, and it is likely that the exact wording of this article will be further changed at the diplomatic conference in November. And the final major difference is the MAC protocol needed to insert a specific rule a new rule for its amending, because, as explained, its scope is based on the Harmonized System, which changes every 5 years to accommodate changes to international trade. For example, 20 years ago, there was no such thing as autonomous drones. So as a result of this creation of new technology, the Harmonized System created a new HS code for drones. And every 5 years, the HS code is updated to accommodate for changes in international trade due to new technologies catching on and old technologies disappearing. A very natural process. Now, the problem for the MAC protocol is that it is dependent on this dynamic existing system. So if a code in the MAC protocol changes because of the Harmonized System, the MAC protocol needs to be able to adapt to that change. And if a traditional conservative approach to treaty law was adopted, then essentially the MAC protocol would have to be renegotiated every 5 years and readopted every 5 years for every contracting state, which would be, from a secretariat perspective, a nightmare, because it means we would have to renegotiate a new treaty every 5 years. Instead, what the MAC protocol is seeking to do is have a conservative traditional approach for the adoption of changes to the substantive legal rules in the protocol, as should be the case, and a more flexible mechanism for administrative or technical changes in relation to the Harmonized System codes. And that's something that the Secretariat is working on to introduce and pass at the diplomatic conference. And we have a particular mandate given to us by states to prepare a text in this regard. So that's the legal issues. I wanted to spend longer on those, as this is an academic forum, and I thought it most appropriate to talk about the legal issues, as we're a room full of lawyers and professors. I will quickly touch on the other issues underpinning the success of the MAC protocol. One of them being that we were asked in 2017 to conduct an economic assessment of the MAC protocol by negotiating states to determine whether it was worthwhile. I brought a number of copies here today on the edge of the desk, so please feel free to take one. Unfortunately, they're only in English at the moment. But essentially, Unidroit asked a number of independent economic economists to undertake a ex-ante economic assessment of the MAC protocol, which was released last year. The analysis was limited to the Unidroit member states, so it's only limited to 63 states. However, the numbers are very exciting. The protocol will apply to MAC equipment worth more than $100 billion in global trade annually. It will improve access to finance and reduce risk. And as a result of that, the economic assessment predicts that over a 10-year period, the MAC protocol will lead to the financing of additional $90 billion of MAC equipment per year. And as a result of this additional equipment being deployed, especially in developing countries, it's expected that on an annual basis, the MAC protocol, if adopted by the 63 Unidroit member states, would have a total impact of $23 billion in developing countries and $7 billion in developed countries. We're very happy about these numbers because it shows there will be a big impact, but particularly for developing countries, this is a very important factor because, which is natural because developing countries tend to have a larger financing gap and not have the same access to financing for the acquisition of high-value, high-tech MAC equipment. And it also noted that the costs of adopting the protocol are very low. Now, one of the other benefits of utilising the harmonized system is it gives us access to trade data. So we can quite easily determine the likely impact of the MAC protocol in individual states, at least in the relation to the import and export of equipment. So before coming here today, we did some research based on the 2017 United Nations export-import data, which is the most recent full set of data available. 2018 is still not complete. And the numbers for Spain are very good. So of the 42 codes within the draft MAC protocol, these in Spain in 2017 imported $1.3 billion worth of this equipment and exported $628 million of this equipment. So Spain is in a very good circumstance because it is both an importer, which means that it should benefit from better access to this equipment, but it will also increase exports because it will be able to export its equipment to new markets. So most countries are either major importers or major exporters. Spain is in that nice middle ground where it will benefit as both an importer and an exporter. Probably unsurprisingly, Spain is importing and exporting more agriculture and construction equipment than mining equipment. Third, as I noted, that given that this treaty is negotiated between states, but the end users of the instrument is the private sector. So Unidroit has worked very hard to include the private sector in negotiations through the creation of a MAC working group, which represents over 4,000 companies involved in the financing, manufacturing, export, and use of MAC equipment. It also includes the legal experts involved in these transactions who understand how they work, and they have been a very important voice in the negotiations and also in promotion and providing the financing for the undertaking of the economic assessment, which was covered by the MAC working group. And finally, and perhaps most important, is support from states. Obviously, a treaty is only as valuable as states that ratify it. So Unidroit is working very hard to have as many countries participate in the diplomatic conference in November, and hopefully, if there are many countries in favour of it, they may even be in a position to sign the protocol in November. We hope that's especially the case for African states. Of course, we deliberately decided to host in Africa in the hope that this would increase participation by African states who we think will be major beneficiaries of this treaty. As noted from this map, which is a little bit different from the Cape Town map earlier, these are the states that were actively involved in negotiations in 2017. Very pleased to see Spain on that map. And we hope that, of course, they will also be at... Yeah, exactly. Spain, who was... We have the expert for the Spanish delegation in the room today. And as I've noted, this is all of this promotion work is in the hope that we will have a very successful diplomatic conference in November. We're undertaking a range of activities in advance of the diplomatic conference to increase participation. The MAC protocol will enter into force when we have 5 ratifications and confirmation that the international registry is up and running and ready to receive registrations. As noted several times already, Spain is in a very good position because not only do we have a very honourable and influential member of the governing council from Spain, but Spain also has one of only 5 international experts that have been part of this negotiation for the last 5 years.
And the Spanish Secretary General.
Oh. I believe you're neutral. I believe you're neutral as Secretary General, Mr. In any case, we are hopeful that Spain will be a strong force in the room in November. Thank you very much.